The night ADX Florence went off script. It happened at 3:02 a.m., inside the most controlled, most monitored, most locked-down prison in America, when something occurred that should have been impossible. Michael, an inmate in ADX Florence's control unit, woke to a loud metallic snap echoing through his concrete cell. At first, he thought it was just another routine sound. But then he saw it. The red security light above his cell door turned green. That light is never green. Not during sleep hours. Not during lockdown. Not for emergencies. Never. Green meant one thing. Unlocked. Michael slowly sat up, his heart pounding. His door. A door made of reinforced steel. Controlled by a digital locking system. Protected by multiple fail-safes, was no longer secure. Outside his narrow window, he heard whispers. Soft, confused, terrified whispers from inmates who had not spoken to each other in months. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Before anyone could make a sound, the entire tier went pitch black. Every light, every camera, every sensor. Dead. Then a deep, slow alarm began to pulse through the darkness. Not the official ADX alarm, but something older, something Michael had never heard in 12 years. He pressed his back against the wall. The cell door was unlocked. The prison was dark. The alarm wasn't standard. And in a place built on routine, control, and silence. What happens when the system fails? Cut to black. The routine that owns your life. Life at ADX Florence doesn't start with violence. It starts with routine, a routine so strict, so repetitive, and so controlled that it slowly becomes the only world an inmate can understand. Michael learned this on his very first morning in the supermax. The light snapped on at exactly 5 a.m., blinding white, never soft, never warm. Breakfast arrived minutes later, pushed through a metal slot without a single word exchanged. Every movement from that point forward was dictated by a precise schedule, a schedule designed not just to organize inmates, but to reshape them. There was no decision-making, no choosing, no freedom in even the smallest moment. He didn't choose when to stand. He didn't choose when to shower. He didn't choose when to breathe fresh air. And even that fresh air came through a concrete wall cage where the sky was only visible through steel mesh overhead. Over time, Michael realized the routine wasn't for safety. It was for control. The staff didn't shout. They didn't argue. They barely spoke. They didn't need to, because the routine did the breaking for them. Every day was the same, identical footprints in identical hours, until Michael stopped asking what day it was. Days melted together like wet paint. Sounds blended into a single hum. Even meals tasted identical, like the flavor had given up. Inside ADX, inmates don't follow the routine. The routine replaces them. And the terrifying part wasn't how strict the routine was, but how comforting it eventually started to feel. Because in a place where nothing changes, routine becomes the last piece of sanity you can hold on to. The meals that control your mind. At ADX Florence, meals aren't just food. They're clocks. And clocks are sanity. Michael quickly learned that the timing of each tray mattered more than what was on it. Breakfast at 5:10. Lunch at 10:30. Dinner at 4 o'clock. Every single day, the trays were nearly identical. Lukewarm beans, dry bread, fruit that tasted like nothing. But the sameness kept the world from falling apart. He would sit on the edge of his bed, staring at the metal slot, waiting for the clank that told him the world was still operating the way it should. If a tray came late by even 1 minute, his chest would tighten. His breathing would speed up. The panic wasn't about hunger. It was about routine cracking. Inside ADX, inmates rely on the consistency of meals to remind them they still exist in time. Without that structure, hours blur into a feeling that never ends. Meals become anchors in a storm of silence. And Michael feared the day one of those anchors broke loose. How silence becomes your enemy. ADX Florence is silent in a way the outside world will never understand. The silence isn't peaceful. It's suffocating. Michael used to think noise was stressful, but he learned quickly that it's silence that breaks you. Inside ADX, there are hours where nothing moves, not a footstep, not a cough, not a voice. Just a low hum of the vents and the endless ringing in your own ears. Humans need sound to feel connected. Without sound, the brain starts creating its own. Some inmates hear music. Some hear voices. Some hear memories. Some hear nothing at all, which might be the worst sound of all. Michael began tapping on the wall sometimes, not to communicate, but just to hear something that was inside his head. But the silence always swallowed the sound instantly, like the prison was hungry for it. The staff who watch without speaking. The guards at ADX don't talk much. They don't need to. Their silence is part of the routine. A reminder that they're not there to comfort you. They're there to control the environment around you, not your emotions. Michael learned that guards speak in gestures, not words. A nod meant step back from the door. A raised hand meant stop talking. A stare meant wait. And no eye contact meant something was wrong. The guards weren't cruel. They were distant, professional, predictable. But even their predictability felt like part of the prison's design. It made the place feel more mechanical than human. And when a guard broke that pattern, even slightly, Michael noticed, the clock, that doesn't move. Inside ADX, time stops meaning anything. Michael lost track of days within months. He began marking time by things that weren't clocks. The number of times the lights flickered, the change in temperature from morning to evening, the rhythm of guard footsteps. He would lie on his bunk and ask himself, what day is it? What month? What year? Sometimes he couldn't answer. Time felt circular, not linear, like he was living the same day over and over again. And the scariest part? He couldn't tell if it was the prison doing this, or his own mind. The recreation box of false freedom. Recreation time at ADX is the biggest lie of them all. They call it yard, but no one who steps into that concrete cage feels anything like freedom. The moment Michael walked inside, he realized the sky he imagined wasn't real. Above him, thick steel mesh stretched across the ceiling like a permanent reminder that even the air had limits. The sun barely reached the ground. Light came through in broken strips, cold and uneven, painting the concrete floor like cracked glass. Michael paced in slow circles, counting each step the same way every inmate eventually does. There's no grass, no open space, no warmth. Just walls, steel, and silence. Even the wind feels different, thin, as if the breeze loses its life squeezing through the grates. Every sound echoes strangely inside the box. Footsteps seem too close. Breathing feels too loud. The cage changes your senses without you noticing. He tried looking upward to feel even a moment of relief, but the mesh ceiling always stole the sky away. Only a slice of blue leaked through, and even that felt artificial. Many inmates describe rec time as the moment they realized how deep their isolation really was. They let us out, they would say, but they don't let us go. ADX didn't give freedom. It gave a different view of the same prison. Over time, Michael began to fear rec time more than staying in his cell. Inside his room, he at least knew the routine, what was behind him, what was above him, what was next to him. In the cage, everything felt exposed. Sometimes he swore he could feel eyes on him, watching from unseen angles. Guards never stayed long. They stood distant, avoiding the sunlit edge of the cage, like something about the space unsettled them too. Every inmate eventually learns the same truth. In ADX, even fresh air becomes a weapon. Fresh air reminds you of what you can't touch. The sky reminds you of where you can't go. And freedom, real freedom, becomes something you only see filtered through steel. The night, that breaks most men. Nighttime inside ADX Florence feels like a different prison entirely. The lights never fully shut off. They only dim to a cold gray glow that tricks the brain into staying half awake. Michael often lay on his back staring at that faint light, wondering if his mind would ever truly rest again. Darkness in ADX isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It wraps around you like a blanket made of fear, pressing into your thoughts until you can't tell the difference between memories and imagination. Nights strip away distractions. There are no footsteps, no food trays, no guard voices, no movement, just a hum of vents and the noise inside your own head. Many inmates say the nights are when the prison begins speaking to you, not with words, but with your own thoughts amplified so loudly they feel like someone whispering from inside your skull. Michael replayed old conversations, old regrets, old mistakes, each one louder, sharper, meaner in the dead of night. Some nights, sleep never came. He would close his eyes, and instead of drifting away, he'd fall into thoughts that felt like hallucinations. He swore the shadows on the wall moved even when the light didn't change. He swore he heard soft tapping under the bed. He swore he felt the air shift as if someone walked past, even though he was alone in a sealed concrete room. At ADX, nighttime is when the mind stops cooperating. What made nights worse was the silence. A silence so pure it became a sound of its own. Some inmates whispered to themselves just to hear a voice. Others tapped on the wall, hoping for an answer. Some cried. Some laughed. Some stared into the dim light until morning. Michael understood something terrifying. You don't need violence to break a man. Just give him a long, endless night with no one to talk to but himself. As the hours crawled by, Michael realized the real punishment wasn't a locked door. It was being left alone with every mistake he ever made. Nights turned into mental interrogations. No judge, no jury, just a man, and the one voice he could never escape. The shift in staff you can feel without seeing. A prison like ADX Florence rarely changes. Guards rotate, but the system stays the same, cold, controlled, predictable. That's why Michael immediately sensed something was different the moment he heard unfamiliar footsteps on the tier. New guards walk differently. Their pace is uneven. Their breathing is heavier. Their reactions are slower. They look around too much, like they don't trust the building yet. And in a place like ADX, hesitation is a sign of something deeper, fear. Even the veteran guards seemed on edge. They walked the hallway faster, avoided lingering near vent openings, and spoke in whispers that weren't meant to be overheard. Radios that once crackled calmly now burst with static every few minutes, followed by quick, tense voices giving orders Michael couldn't fully catch. The energy on the tier felt heavier, like the whole building was holding its breath. Michael observed every detail. Guards avoiding certain cells. Certain cameras being checked more often. Maintenance showing up at odd hours with tools they normally never carried. None of this happened randomly. In ADX, the staff always knew something before the inmates. And whatever was happening now was big enough to choke the entire routine. He also noticed something chilling. The new guards seemed more afraid of the ceilings than the inmates. They scanned overhead vents and corners before unlocking doors, as if expecting something to come from above. Michael didn't know what they were looking for, but he knew they weren't looking for him. Their eyes weren't on the cells. They were on the prison itself. A place as controlled as ADX shouldn't feel unstable. But lately, even the staff looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The inmate who went silent overnight. Torres in cell 214 was the loudest man on the tier. He talked through breakfast, argued with guards, sang at night, and even held conversations with people who weren't listening. His voice was part of the routine, annoying, predictable, and strangely comforting, because it meant someone else was still holding on to their sanity by making noise. Then, one morning, Torres didn't say a word. Not a cough, not a laugh, not a complaint. Silence. Silence, so complete it felt unnatural. In ADX, silence is normal, but not from someone who lives loudly. Michael waited for him to shout for his breakfast, to tap on the wall, to sing, to curse. But nothing came. The tier felt wrong without his voice, like the building itself had swallowed him. By midday, Michael became truly uneasy. Torres didn't take rec. His slot didn't open for food. No guard checked on him. It was as if the entire tier suddenly agreed to pretend cell 214 didn't exist. Michael listened through the wall, pressed his ear to the concrete, tapped gently. Nothing answered back. Torres wasn't ignoring anyone. Torres was gone. But how? And when? Transfers in ADX come with noise, shackles, boots, radios, commands. None of that happened. The guards avoided looking at that cell as they walked past. Even the new staff kept their eyes down when passing 214. They didn't pause. They didn't knock. They didn't slide a tray inside. That's when Michael realized something terrifying. The staff wasn't pretending Torres was still there. They were pretending he never existed. ADX doesn't lose inmates. Not by accident. Not in silence. not without paperwork. So if Torres disappeared without a sound, it meant one thing. Whatever was happening inside the vents and ceilings had finally taken someone. The message scratched where no inmate could reach. Michael noticed a scratch behind his toilet as soon as he woke up. It wasn't a crack or a chip or normal wear. It was handwriting, rough, deep, carved with intention. No inmate could reach behind a sealed toilet. No tool could carve that deep. And yet, somehow, the message existed. The words were uneven, desperate, as if carved by someone who didn't have time. Don't look up. A warning. A command. Or both. Michael felt his chest tighten. Someone had been in his cell while he slept. Someone who shouldn't have been able to open the door or enter undetected. He checked the ceiling, the walls, the corners. Everything looked the same until he noticed a faint smear of dust near the vent. Fresh dust, the kind that falls when metal is disturbed. His pulse quickened. Something had moved in the vent overnight. He stared at the warning again. Who wrote it? The vanished inmate from 214? A guard trying to send a message without being seen? Or something inside the prison Michael never wanted to discover? Whatever it was, it knew something he didn't, and it didn't want him looking up. The ceiling that breathes. Michael couldn't stop staring at the ceiling vent. During the day it sat silently above him like always, but at night it changed. He heard faint clicking, light tapping, rhythmic enough to be footsteps. The ceiling didn't just creak. It shifted, like the concrete itself was breathing. He tried to convince himself it was the building settling. But buildings don't settle at perfect intervals. Buildings don't tap back when you tap lightly on the wall. Buildings don't echo hollow sounds where solid concrete should be. The fear grew slowly, feeding on the silence. Every night the noises grew closer, more confident, like whatever was inside the ventilation system was learning the route of the ducts above the cells, learning how to move without being detected, learning which inmates were awake. Michael began sleeping with one eye open, staring at the vent, waiting to see something. Anything crawl past those slits. The more he listened, the more he realized the truth that no inmate wants to admit. ADX Florence wasn't just a prison. It was a living structure, and something inside it was waking up. The guards who stopped pretending. Guards at ADX are trained to hide emotion, but around this time, they stopped hiding anything. They walked the tier with stiff shoulders, fingers tense on radios, eyes darting the corners that never mattered before. Some carried extra flashlights. Others carried laminated sheets. Emergency protocols Michael had never seen them use. Their silence wasn't professional anymore. It was fear disguised as discipline. Michael noticed one guard wouldn't walk directly under the vents. He moved around them, carefully stepping out of line where dust fell. That wasn't standard behavior. That was survival instinct. The kind people show when they know danger is above them. Guards started moving in pairs instead of alone. Their boots clicked faster. Their keys rattled more. Even their breathing sounded shallow. Whatever was happening wasn't just confusion. It was something they had no training for. And Michael realized the guards weren't controlling the prison anymore. They were reacting to it. The second disappearance. Torres wasn't the only one who vanished. A week later, another inmate, Parker in cell 209, stopped answering roll call. At first, Michael assumed Parker was ignoring guards, but when no tray was delivered, he knew something worse had happened. This disappearance was quieter than the first. No shouting, no noise, no signs of struggle, just silence. A cell with no voice behind it. Guards acted like they didn't hear the absence. They moved on quickly, too quickly, skipping the cell without speaking. Michael began noticing a pattern. Both missing inmates lived near major vent lines. The ventilation layout formed a grid above the cells, and Parker's cell was directly under one of the primary ducts. Something was moving through those ducts. Something human? Something else? No one said out loud, but the pattern was obvious. Inmates were disappearing along the ventilation system. The warning in the walls. Michael began searching his cell for more hidden messages. He found the second 2 nights later. 3 new words scratched faintly into the corner near the floor. Under the grid. He didn't know what it meant at first. But then he remembered Torres' cell, Parker's cell, and the massive ventilation grid overhead. His hands trembled as he traced the letters. Someone left these warnings intentionally, urgently. Someone who knew the truth about the disappearances. Someone who wasn't supposed to be able to move around ADX freely. Michael pressed his ear to the wall. For the first time, he heard something underneath him. Not the echo of water, not the hum of machines, but faint scraping, faint movement. Something alive below the grid. The prison wasn't malfunctioning. It was hiding something. The night, the vents went wild. At 2:47 a.m., every vent on the tier exploded with noise. Not mechanical noise, organic noise. Scraping, dragging, shuffling, rushing air mixed with deep, guttural vibrations that shook dust loose from every corner of the tier. Inmates woke up screaming, banging on their doors. Guards ran down the hallway, shouting orders Michael couldn't understand. Lights flashed on and off like a dying heartbeat. Something was moving fast inside the ducts, faster than a person could crawl, heavier than a guard could step. The vents rattled violently, metal bending under unseen force. Michael backed into his bunk, breath shaking. Every man on the tier realized the same terrifying truth at the same time. The vents weren't just pathways. They were access points. And whatever was inside them had stopped hiding. The guards who finally spoke. The next morning, guards looked wrecked. Dark circles under their eyes, shakier hands, rushed movements. For the first time since Michael arrived at ADX, a guard broke protocol and actually spoke to him. "Stay away from the vents," he whispered sharply through gritted teeth. No explanation, no emotion, just raw warning. Another guard carried tools Michael had never seen before. Thermal scanners, fiber cameras, and handheld devices used for detecting movement behind walls. They checked every vent, every grate, every pipe. But whatever they were searching for, they were searching too late. The staff's fear was no longer subtle. They were terrified. And terrified guards are far more dangerous than angry ones. When the lights turned red, at dusk, the tier lights abruptly shifted from white to deep red, emergency lockdown mode. A recorded announcement played once, glitching, half-corrupted, out-control braille lock. Then silence. Red light flooded every cell, turning concrete walls into blood-colored shadows. Michael pressed his head against the door slot. Sirens started far away, growing louder, echoing through layers of concrete. Guards rushed back and forth, yelling at each other. Something had triggered a full facility shutdown. Michael knew one thing for certain. Lockdowns like this were never caused by inmates. Something inside the structure, inside the vents, under the floors, behind the walls, had triggered this. ADX was afraid. The night of the scraping hands. Michael was jolted awake by the sound of fingernails, scraping the outside of his ceiling vent. Slow, long, deliberate. He froze in place. No inmate could reach that vent. No guard moved that quietly. The scraping moved across the grate, then down the duct toward another cell. Inmates whispered fearfully through the walls. Someone banged their door until their fists bled. Michael felt every hair on his body stand up. Something intelligent was moving, following the line of cells, choosing, searching, and then it stopped right above him. The vent that opened by itself. Just before dawn, Michael heard a soft metallic click above him, not the usual vent creak. A lock. The vent cover shifted slightly, not enough to fall off, but enough to reveal a dark gap, a space wide enough for a hand or a face. Michael backed against the opposite wall, heart slamming in his chest. His breath turned shallow. He could see nothing through the opening, but he could feel something watching him, studying him, learning his patterns, the same way he learned the guards. Then the vent snapped shut again, clean, precise, like a hatch closing. Michael didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The realization that changed everything. By morning, Michael understood a terrifying truth. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't an inmate. The disappearances, the scratches, the warnings, the crawling sounds. They formed a pattern, a trail, a system beneath the prison. Something lived inside the ventilation system, something the staff couldn't control, something that moved freely through the duct grid, something that could enter any cell, anywhere, at any time. The prison wasn't just failing, it was being shared. And the real horror wasn't what happened to Torres or Parker. The real horror was understanding that ADX wasn't the most secure place in America. It was the perfect hunting ground. The truth ADX can no longer hide. When dawn finally crept through the narrow slit of Michael's window, the prison looked the same, but everything felt different. ADX Florence, the place known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, had cracks now. Not cracks in its structure, but cracks in its myth. The myth that this was the one place the government could fully control. The myth that every movement, every breath, every inch of concrete was secure. That myth died the night the vents came alive. For years, ADX was described as unbreakable, impenetrable, escape-proof, a fortress where you could lock away the most dangerous people in the world and trust a building to hold them. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. ADX was never designed to keep something inside the walls, only to keep people from getting out. And now something else was sharing that space. Something that didn't fear doors or locks or guards. Something that moved where humans couldn't. Michael realized that survival in ADX wasn't just about staying calm or following routine. It was about learning the prison's real language, the vibrations in the ducts, the shadows on the ceiling, the warnings scratched by hands that should not have been free. ADX wasn't just concrete and steel. It was a living system with hidden passages, hidden rooms, hidden secrets. Secrets that were awakening one by one. The disappearances were no longer isolated events. They were part of a pattern. Torres, Parker, cells that suddenly fell silent, guards who stopped walking alone, vent covers that shifted without tools. Every piece pointed to one conclusion. The prison wasn't losing inmates. It was feeding on them, or feeding something else. And as the guards panicked, the inmates whispered and the vents fell silent. Michael understood the chilling reality that ADX could never admit publicly. The world's most secure prison wasn't a place of control anymore. It was a place of denial, a place where the system pretended everything was fine, because the truth would shatter the foundation of American corrections. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a supermax isn't the inmates, it's what shares the walls with them.